Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Books I'm Reading Right Now podcast. My name's Caden. I'm your host, and this is a podcast about the books I've read, and then I talk about them after I've finished reading them. Before I begin, I wanted to go ahead and just make a couple statements about what this podcast is. Basically, I don't really read much fiction, and I don't really read a lot of what people generally tend to read. In the sense of I don't read popular books or anything like that. I sometimes do, but not always. But I do have a reading list, and it is hundreds of books long. And I figured when I'm done reading a book, I would like to talk to somebody about it. And I do talk to people about it, but I would like to have less victims. But at the same time, expand the amount of victims that I have. So instead of yapping about it to any particular person, and then having to re-yap about it, I thought maybe I can do that and do this at the same time. So, that being said, the first book on our list is an ancient book from the 3rd century. I think 3rd, maybe 4th century, by the author Achilles Tatius. And the book is titled Leucippe and Clitophon. Now, I got this book back on my birthday in 2025, and then I promised my girlfriend that I was going to read it to her. And then I didn't read it at all. But recently, March 2026, I got on a plane to Houston. And then I was in Houston. And then I was on a plane back from Houston. And then after that, I was resting in my bed after having been on a trip to Houston. So I ended up reading this book during that time. Now, why did I read it? I justified my time reading this book saying that I wanted to read more about Greek mythology and get any sort of hanging pieces that aren't represented in the existing mythological literature. However, that's not actually why I read it. I read it because I have this undying urge to read every single book within the Loeb Classical Library collection. I have dozens upon dozens of their books, and I have read a good majority of the ones that I own. So, at the end of the day, it's really just that addiction. The reason why I had my girlfriend buy it for my birthday is because I have that addiction. I made her buy literally just the first one I saw that I didn't own. I was like, yeah, give me that one. So that's my own personal failing. Now I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief explanation of the plot before I get into the actual weeds of the plot. The book, Leucippe and Clitophon, is basically about a guy named Clitophon who's about to be married to his half-sister, when his first cousin Leucippe comes to town as a temporary war refugee. Clitophon and Leucippe, they fall in love and end up leaving home due to circumstances involving premarital sex so that they can escape their family shame. They end up in a shipwreck, in the hands of bandits, the Egyptian army, pirates, and finally find themselves battling for the legal status of Leucippe so that they can return home. Also, Leucippe dies a few times. Now, the book was written by, as I said before, Achilles Tatius, who is an Alexandrian novelist who wrote romances. At some point, he converted to Christianity and became a bishop. Whether he was a Christian when he wrote Leucippe and Clitophon is unclear, but even if he hadn't, sometimes his Christian leanings in the book are very visible to spot. The introduction to the Loeb Classical Library volume says it best. The story is a panegyric on chastity. If I might add to it, it's a little silly. Now I'm going to go ahead and give you a full rundown of the plot with all 8 of its books. There are 8 books, but think of the books more like as really long chapters. In Book 1, the setting is on the Phoenician coast in the city of Tyre. The time frame that we're talking about here is sometime after Alexander's conquests and before the Roman ones. The description isn't exactly accurate as to what any time frame would be, but it is generally that time of Greek dominance of the Eastern Mediterranean. Clitophon is the son of Hippias, and he's destined to marry Caligone, his half-sister from another mother. Hippias' father also had children from multiple relationships, for Hippias has a half-brother in the far-off city of Byzantium named Sostratus. At the start of the story, a war broke out between Byzantium and Thrace, so Sostratus sent his wife Panthea to Tyre along with his daughter Leucippe, so that they might be safe while the war is being decided. And when Clitophon spots Leucippe, he falls head over heels in love. After all, his sister, as he states in the story, is attractive enough, but a Tyrian 10 is like a Byzantine 6. And he just doesn't want to marry his sister anymore. He wants to marry his first cousin, Leucippe, instead. Clitophon's cousin, Clinias, is due to be married soon as well, and he hates it. He has to marry a woman because Clinias is about as gay as you can get. And he laments his entire life as a tragedy. Then his gay lover boy, whose name I've forgotten already, he's not too important to the story, goes out on a ride on the horse that Clinias gave him and then falls off the horse and breaks his neck, which is sad. Clitophon and his slave/wingman Satyrus work together to flirt with Leucippe, and by the end of book 1, she's showing some interest back. Book 2, the flirting continues, and Clitophon even steals a kiss by pretending that his lip has gotten stung by a bee, which is, I guess it's a line. I mean, she fell for it. Anyway, there's a person from Byzantium named Callisthenes who's infatuated with the idea of Leucippe. So infatuated that he leaves the war to go to Tyre from Byzantium with the intention of kidnapping Leucippe, but he ends up kidnapping Caligone because Sostratus is setting up the wedding celebration for Caligone and Clitophon. She's never mentioned again until the end of the story, and Clitophon is both sad that his sister got kidnapped by who he assumes to be pirates, but he's also happy that he gets to bang Leucippe now. And he doesn't do anything about his kidnapped sister. He's just like, man, that's rough, buddy. So while attempting to sleep with Leucippe, her mother catches them, almost naked. And while she doesn't get a glimpse at the man in the bed, she knows that Leucippe's in there, and now Leucippe is in a lot of trouble. Panthea plots to torture her servant Cleo, who decided that it'd be better to skip town than face the rack, and then Panthea gets so pissed that she's almost certain that Leucippe is guilty. Now, at this moment, Leucippe and Clitophon, they haven't actually done the deed yet, so theoretically they're in the clear, and it's at this moment that Clitophon, Leucippe, and Clinias all decide to skip town. So they get on a boat, and there they meet a man named Menelaus, and they have a philosophical discussion about which is better, bussy or pussy. I fucking wrote that. Yeah, it's about pederasty, and the philosophical discussion is about pederasty. And Clinias and Menelaus talk about why the small window of time in which a pederast gets to enjoy their boy before he becomes a man makes boys more attractive than women, who retain their feminine qualities for longer. Pederasty is a long-standing ancient practice. I don't need to go into ancient culture. It's just a portion of the book that doesn't really speak well in terms of what a modern reader would get out of it. You'd read that, you'd be like, oh, that's gross. But that's a topic for another time. And it's here that Achilles Tatius, if he's not a Christian already, does show a little bit of his personality and a little bit of his beliefs, because he has Clitophon himself showing disbelief in the Greek myths as they talk about them. Now, the third book in the story is when the wackiness really begins. A storm destroys the boat, kills a ton of people on board. Clinias was washed away, so is Menelaus and Satyrus. Clitophon and Leucippe hold on for dear life and barely survive, washing ashore on the Egyptian coastline. As they travel along the coast of Egypt, they're captured by a group of bandits. It's interesting how Achilles describes the bandit group here, uniquely as if it's its own little monarchy rather than as a group of criminals. And the way he describes it, it's as if all bandit groups are like this. Just kind of an interesting note. In any case, this bandit group is large, consisting of about 10,000 men with the ability to withstand the Egyptian army in battle. Ultimately, the Egyptian army saves Clitophon, but Leucippe was separated, taken back to the bandit camp, and prepared to be made into a sacrifice. So Clitophon becomes chummy with the Egyptian commander, starts riding around with the cavalry, but that night he sees Leucippe murdered in a sacrifice, and by the time the morning comes, he's determined to kill himself over the spot where she died. The next evening, he snuck out of the camp, went over to the spot, and found two of the bandits approaching him, and as it turned out, they're Menelaus and Satyrus. They survived the shipwreck. They showed Clitophon the trick that they used to quote-unquote sacrifice Leucippe, who then comes out of her coffin completely unharmed. And that trick is, I think it might be the oldest evidence for a retractable knife. Now, book 3, chapters 20 and 21. If you don't believe me, it's just a full description of a retractable knife. I wasn't expecting that. I think that was the most shocking thing I got out of this entire story when I was reading it. I was 6 beers in when I saw that, but I was pleasantly surprised. So Maybe it's not as surprising to, magic historians out there, but I'm not a magic historian, so it's surprising to me. So in book 4, the Egyptian general loses his courage for fighting the bandits, and then seeing that Leucippe's a fine woman, because in Egyptian 10 you gotta remember is a Byzantine 6, he tries to sleep with her, like several times, and Leucippe keeps denying him access to her body, and at first he's saying things like, we're in a small town, and everyone's gonna know about it, and then by the end she's just like, yeah, it's that time of the month, I don't know, blood, isn't that gross? The general wanted Leucippe in his bed sooner rather than later, and he had an Ethiopian servant named Charis drug her. So she goes down, foaming at the mouth, and Clitophon beats the living shit out of Charis to get information on how to fix her. Charis, he breaks pretty easy and offers to give her the antidote for a small fee, which Clitophon accepts because he is rich Tyrian nobility. And the Egyptians, they end up winning the battle against the bandits, and the threat to the freedom of the travelers along the Nile is dealt with, so all the river traffic along the Nile opens up. And with traffic moving and the general distracted, the gang boards the ship and doesn't look back, bringing Charis along for the ride. Then we get into Book 5. A lot happens in Book 5. The gang arrives in Alexandria, but Charis starts to act a little sketchy. He's made a deal with some pirates on the island of Pharos, hoping to capture Leucippe and make her, his, because in Alexandrian 10 is a Byzantine 6. But Clitophon and Leucippe end up on the island due to some instance involving a dinner invite, and lo and behold, Leucippe is kidnapped again. They attempt to rescue Leucippe from the pirates, a level of dedication he did not have when his sister got kidnapped, and the pirates bring Leucippe forth, and they cut her head off. Clitophon falls into a depression and stays in Alexandria sulking for 6 months. After 6 months' time, Clitophon sees a familiar face he never expected to see again, his cousin Clinias, who survived the shipwreck from Book 3, and he came with news. He went back to Hippias' house, and both Panthea and Hippias obviously knew why Clitophon and Leucippe skipped town together, and that they were willing to honor their marriage. And Clinias has no idea that Leucippe is dead, mind you. So Clitophon takes all of this as a cruel joke given to him by life, and his mental health just starts to just spiral down into oblivion. Clinias and Satyrus, they know better than to let Clitophon sit there and sputter and babble about how sad he is. They know a woman that's a widow, a hot, rich, young widow named Melite from Ephesus, and in Ephesians 10 is a Byzantine 9, which is pretty close. So Clitophon agrees to meet her, and in the spirit of moving on, tells Melite that he is willing to marry her after they leave Egypt behind, land in Ephesus, and just truly get off the sea, which he considers to be Leucippe's grave. Melite agrees to the terms, though she tries every trick under the sun to get Clitophon to sleep with her, which doesn't work. They eventually land in Ephesus, and on the way to the manor, Clitophon meets a woman with a shaved head, forced into slavery. She calls herself Lycaena, and says she's from Thessaly, and that she is a nobleman's daughter, and that her father would be willing to pay for her freedom. She complains of the physical cruelty dealt to her by Sosthenes, who is Melite's slave master, and Melite herself is disgusted by the abuses being suffered by the woman. So Clitophon, Clinias, and Melite, they go over to Melite's mansion. They are preparing for the consummation of the marriage that's going to happen in terms of like throwing a big party, when Satyrus motioned for Clitophon to exit the building for a moment. Clitophon says he's feeling a little sick, and he goes over to Satyrus outside, and Satyrus gives him a letter. It's a scathing letter from Leucippe. She's alive, somehow. So as it turns out, Leucippe is Lycaena, and she's pissed that Clitophon is dating around, because Leucippe certainly hasn't been fucking around after she got kidnapped. Clitophon writes back to her, now determined more than ever to dump Melite and get back together with his love, Leucippe. But Melite is really restless. She just wants to get laid. And she begins to pressure Clitophon, like hard. And he pretends to be ill, and he's able finally, through pretending to be sick, to stall the consummation of the marriage for another day. Melite is pissed, though, because she knows that Clitophon isn't sick, right? She's just angry that Clitophon won't fuck her. So she visits Leucippe and demands that she, as a Thessalian woman, could conjure up some kind of a love potion for her to get Clitophon to love her. Apparently there was some belief that Thessalian women were like potion makers in some way. Leucippe is delighted by this. she didn't really believe Clitophon's letter of, oh, I didn't sleep with her. You have to believe me. Come on, please. But hearing Melite bitch about not getting any action, that more confirms what she was hoping for. So she goes to leave to gather the herbs that she knows probably won't work. And just when things couldn't get much more complicated in the story, the servants come crying to the estate. Thersander is alive and here. Who's Thersander, you're asking, right? That's Melite's husband. Alive. She's not widowed. And now she's got some explaining to do. And then they start arguing, and Clitophon's just kind of sitting there in the middle, and then Thersander storms out. And this is the starting event for basically the remainder of the story. It becomes Thersander against Clitophon and Melite and Leucippe. Anyway, now that Thersander's left the building, Melite turns around and convinces Clitophon to sleep with her, and because there's no legal complications involving consummating a marriage, now that the marriage that Clitophon and Melite had is now illegitimate, Clitophon says, sure. And he never tells Leucippe that he slept with Melite, so to interpret that as you will. All right, that was book 5. There's a lot that happened in book 5, like I said. So books 6 through 8, I may not have been paying as much attention as I was reading through it. I was getting more and more tired, and the beer did not stop flowing. So beyond this point, my memory gets a little bit hazy, but bear with me. I think it'll be a fun time. So Melite has now conspired with the gang on how they might get Leucippe out of the property. Meanwhile, Thersander and Sosthenes, they conspire about how they might kidnap Leucippe, force her to stay, mainly to spite Clitophon and Melite. And thus starts this weird legal drama. Clitophon ends up being jailed unjustly, and Leucippe is kidnapped and hidden. Melite tells Clinias and Satyrus about what just happened, and they go ahead and visit Clitophon in prison and offer their unwavering support. Now, as has everybody who has laid eyes on her so far, Thersander, on seeing Leucippe, falls in love. And now he doesn't just want to keep her as a slave, but he instead wants to make a lover out of her, like outside of his marriage with Melite. Maybe even get Melite, charged with adultery and then, executed so that he can marry Leucippe instead. And Leucippe isn't really all that thrilled about that reality. So Sosthenes, he's sitting there trying to gas Thersander up, but he's not a great wingman. And Leucippe just isn't buying it. At one point, Thersander actually tries to convince her face to face, and when she refused, he smacked her. And then she kept refusing, and Sosthenes threatened to torture her. And she basically told him, yeah, go ahead, try me. And then Thersander decides not to try her. And Sosthenes was probably a little sad about that, because I think he gets a kick out of torturing people. Book 7 begins with somebody in the jail lying about Leucippe's murder and claiming that Clitophon even helped in the murder. Clitophon, he's crushed about hearing his lover die for like the 4th time this year, and he decides that maybe suicide by a legal court battle wouldn't be that bad. His friends try to dissuade him, but his mind is already made, and he's gotten in the car and he's begun driving down Suicide Lane. So the trial begins, and Clitophon admits to the murder that he didn't commit so that he can die. The entire court, they're silent, they're baffled, because his story is just wacky and unrealistic. The storm, Egypt, Leucippe's like 25 deaths, it's all a bit far-fetched. Melite goes and defends him first, and then Clinias steps up, and he further claims that Sosthenes was a criminal, outright, for purchasing a slave from pirates. Now, Clinias' speech actually persuades the majority of the court, but Thersander had most of the court in his pocket, and so he demanded a sentencing. Melite demanded Sosthenes to speak, so they went to go and summon Sosthenes. Surprise, surprise, Sosthenes, he's trying to get a bite out of Leucippe as well, and when he's summoned, he knows that he's definitely guilty of dealing with the pirates, and he decides to bolt to Smyrna, leaving Leucippe's cell unlocked. Sosthenes is never seen again. 2 days pass, and Thersander comes to court and proclaims that Clitophon and his friends have killed Sosthenes because he hasn't arrived in court yet. So now he demands a second trial, not to condemn Clitophon, he's already condemned, but to see if Melite was a confidant in the crime. So now Clitophon was going to be tortured, so that's fun. Now at this point, the high priest of Artemis had arrived in town, and a person from Byzantium is leading the procession. That person is Sostratus, Leucippe's father. Now, through a comedy of errors, while Sostratus was leading the procession of Artemis, Leucippe figured out that her cell was unlocked and made a mad dash toward the Temple of Artemis and missed her father by like 5 minutes. Sostratus ends up near the court, and he hears that Clitophon has admitted to murdering Leucippe. And he gets so angry, he's pretty much thinking about killing Clitophon himself. But something happened, Clitophon broke free, and he decided he wanted to live, suddenly, and sprinted toward the Temple of Artemis looking for safety. And imagine the look on his face when he saw that familiar Byzantine 10 clinging to the altar. Sostratus and Clitophon, they are beyond glad to see Leucippe alive, and this time, hopefully, for good. Which leads us into book 8. In this last book, I don't remember it as well as I should. I'm going to go through the basics real fast. One trial ultimately boils down to whether or not it's legal for Clitophon to live, since he was condemned to die, even if moments after the trial it was discovered that he was innocent. The other trial focuses on Clitophon and Melite's marriage, and whether or not it was considered consummated. And it wasn't, as Clitophon and Melite didn't have sex until after their marriage was made defunct by Thersander's return home. There's a trial of chastity in which Leucippe entered the grotto of the panpipes. Basically, if she had remained a virgin all this time, she would be allowed to step foot out of the grotto. Otherwise, she would disappear. She does not disappear. And this isn't the first trial for chastity I've actually seen in literature. I've read a book titled The Death of Ravana, which had a similar trial, but instead the woman had to walk through a fire, and she came out unscathed on the other side, which meant that she hadn't done anything wrong. But anyway, Thersander, he's livid at this point, and he even sues Leucippe and Sostratus. Melite is put through an ordeal of her own, an ordeal to see whether or not she was guilty of adultery. And Melite absolutely is guilty of adultery, but on a legal technicality, due to how the court worded the argument, she's innocent of adultery during the time in which Thersander was gone, because Clitophon and Melite fucked after Thersander returned. Anyway, Melite completes her trial, as does Clitophon and Leucippe and Sostratus, and everybody's found to be innocent. And the next day, Thersander, he flees Ephesus, and the charges are dropped. Finally free, everything could return to normal. Clitophon learns from Sostratus that Caligone, his sister, the one that was kidnapped, actually is now about to marry Callisthenes, and the two are a very happy and healthy couple. She mellowed him out, you might say. And finally, Clitophon and Leucippe are married alongside Caligone and Callisthenes, back in Tyre. Hippias officiates the wedding, and everybody lives happily ever after. The end. So you're probably wondering, what's the value of this book for the reader? Well, it's fun, so there's that. I liked it. There's a few neat descriptions in there, which I would like to make mention of, which I wrote down in the back of the book for later referencing. There's some really good descriptions of some paintings in this book, and I think it was a Greek art form at one point to be able to describe a painting and make it seem more beautiful with your words than it could be with your eyes. I believe that Achilles Tatius did try to take a crack at that in this novel. There's also the Tyrian myth of Dionysus introducing humanity to wine, the Tyrian myth of the discovery of Tyrian purple dye, which the footnotes stated might have been the color scarlet, a description of the fight between Perseus and a sea monster, the one that he killed to save Andromeda, so that's pretty cool. There's a description of Prometheus's punishment and Heracles rescuing him. There's a reference to the story of Niobe, along with some small references to about a dozen other Greek myths. There's a decent-sized reference to the story of Philomela and Tereus. The ordeal of the panpipes and Pan's crafting of the panpipe instrument is mentioned here. So is the story of Rhodopis, Aphrodite, Artemis, and Euthrychus. If I had to rate my experience out of 10, I would rate it an 8 out of 10 or so. I think it was a lot of fun, and I don't think I would reread it. It certainly didn't change my life. All right, now the end of my script here just says "let the listener go." So this has been, what did I name this? What did I name this? This has been the Books I'm Reading Right Now podcast, where I talk to you about the books that I've read, and then after I read them, I go ahead and I talk to you about them. The next episode will come out when it comes out. I will never commit to a schedule for this reading because I have things to do in life. However, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.